All right. Well, I guess
Excellent.
we can kind of get into it, right? So, for those of
Yes.
you who have been here before, you already know what I'm gonna say. Welcome to yet another one. For those of you who haven't been here before, so welcome to our workshop webinars where we go through the this month's challenge dataset. And essentially, what these webinars are all about is we're going to be talking about dataset a little bit, and we're also going to be discussing or telling you about certain tips and tricks on what to take into consideration when working with this dataset. Now, of course, you don't have to always take our approaches. You don't have to do exactly what we're saying to do. These are just some ideas. If you have a better approach on how you want to do this, or there's a different method that you want to use, you're more than welcome to do it. This is just to kind of give few ideas on how to tackle certain things, how to do things on a visual basis, how to, for example, do something on a Power Query if we have any tips regarding the dataset. So we're just basically giving you a quick intro on how to go approach this particular data set. But yeah, so this month we have a data set that's regarding the transportation logistics industry. There are different many use cases, different things that we could have taken a look into, but we kind of focused a little bit more on one side of things. And even in this data set, I think Federico, you can agree with me. There's so many directions that you can take with it that it's
100%.
really keen to focus on one of them. That's the number one tip, guys. Pick your sort of path that you want to take here. I started to look into the data set, and there's different directions that you can look into. If you go to our challenge website, challenge page itself, you're gonna say I think there's like 10 of them listed out. Those are completely different paths that you can take or directions that you can take with the data set. There's even more that you can go ahead and kind of figure out what you want to do with it. And one thing that I can definitely tell to you as well, guys, is don't forget that we don't limit you only to this data set. If you have anything that can add an extra layer to it, you can add that additional data set as well. If you want to just enhance the current data set with a little bit of DAX or with a little bit of sort of mock-up data to kind of give them whether groups, segments, or whatever, you're more than welcome to do that. We don't limit you in that direction. We give you the base data set, but how you tackle this, how you approach this is completely up to you. But yeah, enough about that. I think Federico, there are a few things that you wanted to showcase them as well and kind of.
Yes, I'm going to say hello first to Maria Eugenia and Maura in Argentina and Crystal in Mumbai that she already submitted her entry.
Yeah.
Crystal, yeah, between you and me, everybody, cover your ears. Don't rush. There is plenty of time. If not, everybody is going to copy your report. Okay? Sorry, my telephone.
No, it's okay. Life is life. You can't control everything, guys.
Oh,
It's what it
God.
is.
Okay, so let me share something before, if I
Hmm.
remember how to do this.
Hello, honey.
Why I cannot share this? Me and my problems with sharing.
It's sharing itself. It's always a problem.
I got them open. I don't know why it's not allowed. But wait. Okay, I'm gonna have to do kind of this. And now, yeah.
There we go. See, sometimes you just have to do some little bit of magic with it.
Okay, as
There we go.
Avis mentioned before, this is a data set that needs preparation. Plenty of serious preparation. And not about what transformation you have to do, it what angle I'm going to pick up for my analysis. Okay, there are so many columns, okay, that you cannot analyze everything. It will be too much. I can say that 50% of this column might not be even important for your analysis. So as Avis mentioned before, tip number one is choose your focus, your point of analysis. And all the columns that are not relevant to it, please delete them. Okay, so let me go and now I'm gonna go somewhere else. And probably I had to do the same. You got it? It's coming? Yes. Guys, the dataset provides you with a dictionary. Please spend a few minutes going through it. Make sure you understand, you give it some meaning to what every column information is about. Okay, so instead of going and throwing chart like crazy, okay, check the dictionary. Think about every column and the meaning of it. What is happening now? Why? If it's not allowing me to no, it doesn't allow me to change. Maybe something happened
Yep.
on my thing. Can you take over with your stuff? And I try to fix it.
Sure. Let me move this around. I'm gonna quickly share the screen.
Oh, I got Abby. I got
Never
it.
mind.
Sorry.
No worries, guys. It's a live session. These things happen, right? We can do everything from our side.
Oh no,
But
I can actually name myself Super Clancy in sharing stuff. Hands up. If somebody's asking you who is the Clancyest sharing, that's me. Okay, so I loaded the data and I realized that some data types, and specifically the data time columns, they change. Okay, so I went, okay, one by one to make sure all the data was as per the data dictionary. Okay, and I'm referring that this came as a day and time. I'm referring that this and this also came as date and time. So what I did is to make sure I had the right data type, okay, in every column. Okay, that was my first step. And you don't need to do this step. You can do all that step in the same table. I just did for you to show. Then I came to the data set and started taking the columns that I didn't like it. Initial columns that I was sure I'm not going to use. Okay, I most probably will carry on taking columns as I go along because they are not needed. I don't know. You can see the window here, the little window. No, you cannot see it.
no,
Well,
the little
I
one. No, we can
took
see the power query. Yeah.
Yep, I took carry location, minimum and kilometer to be covered in a day, and the driver mobile number as an example. Okay, remember, I am sure another 5 more columns will disappear in my process. And then I did some cleaning steps. We have a column that gives me the location, the city in India, and the state in India all together. So what I did was to split, very simple splitting process, okay, by comma all along the column, and it provided me with 3 new columns: location, origin, and state. Sorry, city and state. And I did the same for the destination. Excuse me. Destination, location, city, and state. Another transformation I did, I think I replaced, we have some nulls in here, right click, replace value, nulls, and give me a value. Text, in this case, no data or no data provided. And then I keep checking. There is something that, there is another column that I took away that was a very long column, totally unimportant for me. And these are the columns that so far I have left. Let me give you a little sample of this one. Okay, as I mentioned you before, we have the location, the city, and the state. By the way, I went to Google and checked what is Pune. This is a city. Is what? And it told me it's a city. I checked what Maharashtra, sorry if I pronounce it wrong, it is, and it told me it's a state. So now I know how to name my column. Very simple. I click by delimiter. It recognizes the comma, each occurrence of the delimiter, and OK. And automatically it gives me the location, the city, and the state. By default, you will go now double click in here and change the column. Yeah? You can do that here, yes, guys? It's still gonna pop up, but it's kind of more sophisticated. And if I didn't do anything wrong, it will work. It will not work because I did something wrong. Because it's here, Federico. Well, it should be okay now. Yeah. Now it's okay, guys. Okay, so that is one of the transformations that you are going to need to do, actually, to separate this all-in-one location column. And it also is going to help you later on to do your dimension tables. Okay, Federico, how do you do this dimension table? I will duplicate that, the only one you have. Okay, I'm going to call it dimension origin, whatever you want to call it, origin location. And then I'm going to pick up the location, the city, and the state. Right click, and I'm going to remove other columns. And I'm going to select all of them by clicking Shift and selecting the three columns. It will select all of them. Double click and remove duplicate. Okay. Now I will cancel. Okay, the location is my main. I'm gonna sort it ascending. So I got the A, B, C, and everything. And what I do too, and you can do this exercise in our website, we have a page called Skill Builder, where Tony, one of my members, actually tell you how to go through a flat data set to a proper data model. Another thing I will do is I will add a column, index column from 1, location ID. And when I have done all that, okay, with my dimension, I make sure I merge this with my fact table, bring this into the fact table, and delete the other ones of these in the fact table. Okay, hope you understand me. You only need the location ID in the fact table because the rest is here in your dimension table. Okay, think about this. I can actually probably do it with that one very quickly. If not, my time is. Let me do this very quickly. We need to look for this one, guys. This one, control this one to make sure everything match properly. And if everything is okay, I'm going very fast. The only thing I will bring here is the location ID. Something wrong in my process, and when that is properly, because I went very fast, you come here and you only leave and you will get these three and you will delete them, only leaving the ID. Okay, and you will do the same with all your dimension. So your fact table is short and long, okay, and your dimension are wide, okay, and short. Okay, so that was for me today, Avis. I don't think I have nothing further to add, but only make sure, guys, that you clean your data set, choose your focus, take what is not important, do a proper cleaning, a model, and spend a few minutes in your data dictionary to understand the columns. So that's for me, Avis.
All right. From my side, one thing that I wanted to add that is something that I've just come across a lot is what Federico already mentioned, right? So you can use, for example, split by delimiter, you can use the comma as a separator. There's one golden rule that I usually say, kind of try to follow it every single time. And that is, as soon as you finish the split by column, the next thing you do on all separate columns that you created from it, use the trim transformation. The reason why trim is so important is because it deletes the
Delete
leading,
space.
yeah, the spaces before and after the text.
Sorry.
It might not seem like it's a big issue, but from time to time you're gonna come across, for example, data entry points where you have a little bit of a space between the name, then there's space after the name, and you're gonna think like, why are these different entries? Because it uses the same name visually, whereas in reality, from a data perspective, those are two different values. Remember, guys, data is not a person, right? Data is going to be very principal. Well, you had spaces, so that's a completely different unique identifier. You had spaces before or after, that's again a new identifier. So you have to be very precise with these things. So what I mean by this is, like, for example, if you right click, split by column, by delimiter, use the same comma, press OK. Now we have these three columns. So what I usually do is, as I said, right, this is a golden rule that I usually try to teach everybody, is all these three, right click, transform, and trim. Sometimes you might see there's no difference whatsoever, but for example, even here we can see right here, see these two, for example, there's a space before the text. And unless I trim them, when I'm going to create, for example, a combo or a column chart or just a slicer with the values, Power BI would consider those two to be two unique values. So one with the space, one without the space. So yeah, it's a very small little trick that I usually just apply to make sure, because you learn from your mistakes, and this was a common mistake that I did in the beginning. So you kind of get used to things. But yeah, it's just a very quick tip.
No, I think it's important. Sometimes you go to your dimension and you see something that is not there, or you say, "What is going on?"
Yeah, yeah.
Eh? The first thing you do is you check your relation, you check your trimmings and you cleaning because it's gonna happen more than once. It's
Oh yeah.
nothing that it doesn't happen to us. It happened to Avi, it happened to me, probably every day, and that we have to go back and check what happened.
Trust me, just
Okay.
because we kind of get used to these things over time doesn't mean that we still don't make these mistakes or just we oversee this. Now it still happens almost every single time, but you kind of get used to things. The other thing is, like Federico already also mentioned this, right? Do try to figure out what is going to be your focus with the data set. There's a lot of different paths that you can take, and we already had these questions also coming in the support channels for the webinars and everything. Is, for example, we see that we have a lot of different dates. We have the booking date, we have the travel start date, we have the travel end date. What date am I supposed to, for example, use to create a date table and so forth? So it all depends on what is going to be your analysis based upon. If you're going to be doing, for example, like what I did in this case, is I'm doing analysis based on the booking date. So everything that I analyze is based on that one particular date. But you might also want to have and do the analysis based on, for example, the end date of a trip, just to see, for example, when certain locations are the busiest, or, for example, when certain fleet locations are going to have the most transportations going out of it based on the start date. So those are completely different ways on how you can look at exactly the same data set. Those are three different paths. One way is you kind of lock everything in a sense that you just have one relationship, because you can have multiple active relationships between a calendar and a date column. The alternative is you create measures which use a function called use relationship. So use relationship is an amazing DAX function that you can learn. And what it essentially allows you to do is, for that calculation, activate an inactive relationship. So even though it's physically not active in the model, you can call upon it within the calculation. And that allows you to kind of have it within the same visual, or different other approaches. Um, what I did here is pretty basic, right? So what I wanted to play around with is, okay, I know that I'm going to be doing the analysis based on the booking date and the booking count. So that's my main focus, right? The booking itself. So I just did two main properties that I want to quickly look at. I wanted to see how many bookings do I have in total, and what's the date difference. The date difference in this case is between the start date and the end date. So I want to see how long the typical booking times are, right? So for example, if I look at a particular time frame, I want to see what's the average booking sort of length. That's the sort of approach that I'm looking into here. And I have different visuals to showcase this. We do have a timeline where, for example, if we look at everything that's coming from 2019, we can see there's 46 entries, but there's a lot more activity happening in 2020. Remember, you don't have to always utilize everything, right? So you can kind of play around with different things. So one of the things that you can do here is, let's say, if you see that, for example, let's say if you look here, in April you had one booking. In June you had one booking. In November, three bookings. December, a little bit more active, but still kind of maybe not enough. So what you can do is you can always limit the date frame as well. So you can say that I'm only going to be focusing on 2020. 2019 was when we were starting the system, so there's a lot of missing entries and so forth. So I'm just excluding that. I'm focusing on 2020. You can do that. It's completely up to you guys how you tackle these things. So once I have a date timeline, I'm looking at sort of a trend line. Okay, I see certain months. I have the ability to switch between different views like days, months, and so forth to kind of start to play around with this. But I also want to see, okay, since I'm focusing on the booking, what I want to understand from the data set is, for example, what are the busiest times of the year? That's when I have the monthly view that allows me to see it. Here we can see it kind of flatline, right? So the data set maybe is not being updated or whatever the reason is. I might also, for example, separate and say that, okay, only up until August is when I'm looking at the data set, right? But even if I'm taking everything into account, what I wanted to do as well is I wanted to understand which are the busiest days of the week. So when do we have the most bookings coming in and out? So as we can see from the table, the Sunday is the easiest one. So those on Sundays working, they're gonna have a little bit of an easier time, whereas everybody else basically has a pretty rough time if we look at sort of the average, right? So that's one of the things. To get the day names, there are multiple ways on how you can do this. The easiest by far, I think personally, it's the easiest by far. Of course, if you have a calendar table, Usually it's already done there. But if you don't have a calendar table, the easiest thing that you can do is go into Power Query, and I'm just going to do it on even, yeah, even right here, booking date. Right here, add column, find the date based upon which you want to get the day. Make sure it's add column, not transform. You can do the same thing with both, but in this case, you're creating a new column, and this one you're transforming the original column. So I'm choosing the add column option. I choose the date, and I just find name of day. Click on it, and that's going to create a new column at the very end of your query that's already coming in based on the model. In my case, you can see I can also change the locality. So for example, this one's in English, this one's in Latvian since I'm from Latvia. But I can also use the gear symbol, which allows me to further customize it a bit more and say, hey, there's going to be a different locales approach for this particular column as well. So there are different ways in how you can tackle this. But what this allows me to do is, for example, just to quickly understand, really based on the day of the week, which ones are the busiest, when I need to have a bit more resources available, a bit more agents available at the stations, and so forth. At the same time, what I also wanted to do is understand how are the bookings coming in on hourly or groups of hours, right? So, for example, let's call this night, morning, midday, afternoon, right? Or something like that. You can decide on how you want to group them. But basically, well, it seems kind of understandable, right? That most bookings are coming during the time frame when people are the busiest. But at the same time, we can see that there's a lot of bookings happening from 6 a.m. till 12. A little bit less in the evening and night. We still do have them. Not a lot of them, but we still do have them. So that allows me to kind of take a look at them. And of course, underneath, I also have, if I open it up, I can see individual hours, how are they looking. You don't necessarily have to create, like for example I did here with the grouping, and only see the underlying data underneath it. No, you can of course also go directly and just showcase all the hours, right? Just make sure that it's still visible for the end user to see the labels. Like in this case, for example, we can do like this, allow extended labels to kind of omit some of the labels if it's needed, but so that they understand the range where it's coming from and to. So things like that, for example. But that allows me again to see how bookings are happening in hours. We can see when it's the most quiet. We can see what are the peak times, for example. Again, based on that, I can allocate agents and everything. And the same principle, since we have the booking locations. In this case, I think I'm using the destination. So I want to see where these bookings are going towards, but we can also go for the origin location. So latitude and longitude based on origin. If you want to really play around with this, what you can do is, of course, you can also create a field parameter, which basically would allow you to switch between the origin location versus the destination location, and see maybe there's a trend happening there between different time periods, between different days of the week, and so forth. But one interesting thing that I wanted to play around with in this case is we do have a column, and you can see I'm definitely not following what Federico said. I have all the columns that we had in the data set, just because I'm kind of messing around with it. But
You're exploring the data again. You're
this is
exploring.
my way of exploring it. But yeah, one interesting column that I found in the data set is the transportation distance. So that's the distance for the booking that was taken. That's going to be basically travel, right? So that's a number that I wanted to implement somehow into the report and basically have as a variable. So what I did is I'm going to be using this distance as a variable for the map visual, and I'm going to be utilizing a functionality called node reach. So node reach essentially is a functionality that allows you to create a radius around a particular point on the map within the set x value. So in order to get those values, I'm doing two things. First of all, I'm creating a slicer for that distance so that I can allow the users to limit the distance itself. So whether it's going from 0 to 2000 miles, or it's going from, I don't know, 50 to 100 miles. So I'm allowing the user to kind of look for a range of things. And the other thing that I'm doing is I'm also defining the maximum distances. In this case, if you think about it like a row level basis, right? Every distance is going to be a maximum, but I just need to call upon that value in some shape or form. So I'm using a maximum for that. And that value is the one that I'm using actually for the node reach. Now, the effect that it allows me to achieve is the following. So I can say, for example, From 50 to 100-kilometer distance, we have in total 243 bookings. On the map, we can see where the main points of interest are. So these are the destinations coming in, or where the vehicle is going to be left at. But what I've done is, since I'm using the node reach, you can see that as soon as I zoom a little bit closer and I have disabled the clusters, I have these little areas being drawn around the points. So if I get closer to a certain location, it allows me to understand and see, okay, this is the area where it's coming from, basically. That's the travel distance that has been determined. So at any point of time, for example, let's say if the travel distance is within a 50-mile radius, but the booking itself was for 40 miles, I could highlight those in red just to kind of say, hey, the booking was for a radius of 40 miles, but you traveled a bit further than that. So things like that, you can play around with those variables as well. You can of course also make it more prominent because this one's rather kind of visible, not too visible, right? So that's the fill color opacity. So I could increase it to something like 30%, for example, just to kind of see where things are happening. And I can see, for example, where I have multiple locations, you can see multiple things are in the same region. Now, what's interesting about these node reaches is if you actually click on one of them, what it does is it filters everything that's within that radius. So you can also see, for example, okay, so we have a lot of vehicles coming in this particular region, but we also have few other locations that are coming in the same point. So if we kind of think about what would be, let's say, the replacements if something happens at the point of booking, do I have a vehicle in a radius of 20 miles ready to be replaced if something happens, right? So that could also be taken into account and played around with these sort of functionalities. But yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm using the slicer to determine the boundaries of the min and max values. And I'm using the max value just because I wanted to make sure that if there's anything higher, that it allows me to see it right here. The first thing that might confuse you at the very beginning is like this, for example. If you create a card and you use the max travel distance, it's always going to be a particular number, right? It's one number. Remember, a card just is going to return the result. Whereas if you think about it as a row level basis, if I, for example, create just a duplicate, and this is how I also work with my reports. Whenever I want to convert something into something else or want to see what's underneath it, I don't need these two right now. I'm going to have the map, take the map, create a copy, convert it into a table, and see what's in the belly of the teddy bear, right? So basically, I'm looking at, okay, so if I filter this out, we can see that the max travel distance varies because it's on a row level basis. That's why, for example, when you look at the map, you can see that certain bubbles are maybe a little bit smaller. Well, that's because the max distance for that location is different. It's not necessarily 100 kilometers. If you would want to set it to something specific, then the approach would be just a little bit different, where you specifically define. In that case, I would probably do like this, right? If you want to say that, hey, I want to see everything that falls within the radius of 100 miles, that's one specific value for all the data points, regardless of what's the book distance. I would most probably just let's expand. It was under modeling, new parameter, numeric range. Say that minimum is going to be 0, maximum is going to be, I don't know, 200, increments of 1, default is going to be 50. You can, of course, figure out which one you want to use there. But then you have a new parameter. In this case, it's parameter 3, where I can choose the distance. And that value from parameter 3, this one, is going to be the one that I use in the node reach. So now I'm physically just defining one specific radius around everything. Doesn't matter what's the highest booking distance that you had, you're defining that particular radius. So you can play around with these different ideas. Yeah, that's one part of it. The other thing that I was also playing around with, of course, and this happens every single time, right? What do I want to focus on? Is the location important to me right now, or am I focusing more on the time scale of everything? So here I had the map visual. Whereas, for example, if I go to a different page, we can see that this is where I start to take a different approach. I'm comparing everything to an average from what's available to me. Because straight away, even if it would be the map, right? This, even though it's the same data set, it looks completely different. That's because I'm focusing on different things. So what I've done here is essentially I've added also a threshold on the visual itself. That's a line based on the average from what's visible currently. And then, of course, for the series, I've also enabled conditional formatting. And the conditional formatting works in a way that everything that's above the average of the series is going to be in green, everything below is going to be in red. And the good thing is, of course, it takes into account the context. So if I switch to a daily view, you can see that even though we had, for example, all of the August in green, we can see that there are still few days which fall below a certain threshold. So you can play around with, again, different views, different capabilities. And the one thing that I wanted to do across the board here is just make sure that everything follows the same logic, right? I'm not only focusing on just a single visual which references the averages, but every single visual references averages and showcases you quickly, for example, which days are the ones that are above the average, which hours of the day are with the highest numbers. You can, of course, also use additional highlighting points. The one thing that I would just recommend you to do is don't overkill it. Don't try to do as many things as possible. Make sure that what you're trying to recreate or what you're trying to showcase actually makes sense and it's not visually overloading.
I think maybe it is better just to focus instead of having to put everything on a page that
Yeah,
doesn't make any sense. And that is something that today talking to Avis about it, something that we would like to pass to you. Focus. What is your point of the analysis? Don't bring everything on the table or throw me all KPI you can because I don't know what I'm reading.
absolutely.
Okay?
Because it's one of the things that I've noticed it definitely going through the reports. Probably Federico has noticed this as well. Is sometimes you try to answer as many questions as you have in the brief, but it also makes your report just have a little bit of everything, but not clearly answering anything.
Yeah. There is a tendency, and I realize that even at work, of putting too much, not only visuals, but features. If I can put 10 field parameters, I will put 10 field parameters. I can put 20 filters, I will put 20 filters. No, guy, less is more, okay? Because me, as a user, need to read that,
Yeah,
okay? And I don't have the time to explain what is that about it, what that parameter field does, okay? You have to give me that as a baby food, okay, that I can see what I'm looking at easily. Yes, I can use a couple of filters, fantastic, but don't give me too much. It's actually a problem in design called features creep. Too many things.
yeah.
Okay, that's it. Avi.
No, no, I mean, and comments were right as well. So it's the same thing. Like, for example, remember, guys, that you have the ability to also have multiple pages. You don't have to squeeze everything in a single page. So even from what I did right here, right, I could, for example, state that on this page, even if I wouldn't have the map, I just want to focus on the timeline itself. So I'm going to look at the total timeline. I'm going to look at the different days, different months, different hours, different, for example, groups of hours. So I'm focusing purely on the time aspect. Whereas on the next page, I'm going to be starting to look into, okay, who are the main suppliers who are taking my vehicles, what type of vehicles, what they're transporting. So that's a different segment that I'm analyzing. Don't try to just put in everything just because you can. It's one of the biggest traps that there is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things then. So here I'm just using the conditional formatting plus the thresholds to kind of quickly showcase things. One thing that you can also do here, and this is actually something that I've fallen into trap as well myself when I tried to do it. I didn't realize it at first, but things happen. So what I did is, but initially I created a booking count based on supplier name. Okay, I wanted to have the top end. Of course, this is the simplest way, right? When you do it through the filters, because you kind of hard lock it for the end user. You can also make this more dynamic. There's a bunch of different videos on YouTube that you can find how to make these dynamic sliders of the top end, right? We also had these, I think, in one session I showcased how to do it. But yeah, YouTube is your friend in these cases. So, but what I did is I locked in. Okay, I want to see the top number of suppliers based on the booking count. Cool. At the same time, whilst looking at the data, I realized, okay, we have the supplier, but I also want to have the customer. but I don't really have the space. So theoretically, I could use a field parameter, right? Because that's what everybody's talking about recently. Like field parameter for this, field parameter for that. And Federico said 10 of them if it's possible. Make everything too dynamic. But the idea was okay, I could theoretically create a field parameter. But what happens in that case is I already have a field parameter for that. I think I didn't delete it. It's this one. So I'm going to be using a slicer. I'm going to be using the field parameter. Yeah, there we go. So supplier name, shipment type, customer name. So those are my three different categories that I would like to look a little bit more into. I could, of course, style it, make it look like a tile, basically a button, extend it, make sure it fits here. Perfect. Then go for the visual. Instead of a category, I'm using the parameter, not using the name of the parameter, but the values of the selected field. Okay, cool. I don't need this one anymore because, well, it kind of becomes obsolete because I'm passing one filter. So my initial thought process was, well, but I have the parameter, so I can use the parameter. But you can see already here, this is what happens on the parameter field. You don't get the values for individual fields because this one reads it as columns. So even if you would try to do something like this, it just doesn't make any sense. So what I would probably do is if I can't use field parameters, but you can do whatever you want. I have it in my mind and I will have the switch between the suppliers and the customers. In this case, just use a bookmark. Switch between two
Yeah.
different visuals. One focuses on the supplier, one focuses on the customer. You don't always have to figure out a new roller coaster. Sometimes, like Federico already said this as well, right? Sometimes less is more. Bookmarks have been around since the very beginning, and it was the initial approach on how people were basically doing field parameters because we didn't have that capability. We were just using different bookmarks for different
Yeah.
states. So create that.
Field parameter had the limitations too. They are
Of
not
course,
always working.
the
And
field parameters. Yeah, go ahead.
no, carry on. Carry on.
I think the biggest limitation for field parameters is you have to remember that it's only viable if you are using the same chart type for everything. And there's no more dynamic parts to it, right? It's sort of locked, but just switching the values and maybe categories. Whereas bookmarks allow you to switch between visual types, different configurations. You can just switch around different views, basically. So that's another thing to take into account.
That's what you remind me now about the dynamic. And it came back to me to filters that I have told you guys to check and you filter how everything interacts. Okay, to disconnect. So if I don't want this filter to affect this visual disconnected, okay, the problem with that is that we have too many that you start disconnecting everything and there is no dynamism at all. There
Yeah,
is no filtering at all. So you need to take that into account. The same way we want to be too dynamic that we overreach the limit, sorry, and it doesn't move. You just click wherever you want to click and it has been disabled because you didn't want that with this one and so on. So be aware of that too.
yeah. But yeah, so those things, just one thing that I would recommend is I did notice this last month a bit more than previous months is play more with your visuals and filters you have on the page. You want to try to avoid any case where the report just breaks and you get a blank in return. If it's a card, you can always replace blank with a text that says, for example, not applicable, or anything that just makes sense to the user. Blank is not the worst case. The worst case is because a card is still going to showcase you blank, whereas a visual is just going to break. And that's the last thing you want to do or allow to happen, right? So you have to think about those variations and what to do with them. We've done different things. Like in one case, we had a customer where a blank was just a case that can inevitably happen and there's nothing you can do about it. You can try to replace it, but certain scenarios are also going to come in new that are eventually going to give you a blank. So what we did is basically we created a card that was behind the visual. The visual itself was transparent, so if a visual breaks it's transparent, but behind it we had a card that just said, hey, this is not applicable in this case. you know
Yeah,
not the
there is a
greatest, but
couple of videos. There is a couple of videos on that too. I use it a couple of occasions, and there is no applicable. Or when you have two major, you have this year and the previous
Yeah.
year, you go to the first year, there is no previous year. Okay, so that when you say no previous year or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. There are different solutions, different approaches. But yeah, the one thing that I would really want to emphasize on this workshop is focus, guys. There's a lot of different ways that you can analyze this data set. Choose one. If you want to extend it a bit, go for it. But don't try to analyze every single aspect that is being covered here. Because we have suppliers, we have customers, we have this, and we have locations itself, we have the timeline, we have the different materials, different shipment methods. Like there's a lot of different things that you can go and try to analyze here. Focus on something rather more specific, but give us a report that allows us to actually get insights, not just an overview.
And remember, you have 3 pages, guys. You can focus
Yeah.
on one page time analysis, okay? In another, what kind of breakage or the what track are the most needing help, okay? What part or whatever you consider as a dimension, what area, what location, what state, what city, okay? You have 3 pages, okay? So you can share your analysis, okay, on these 3 pages.
Hmm. All right. What else? Yeah. Don't forget bookmarks. One last remark is whenever you create buttons, not navigator, but these two, apply all slicers and clear all slicers, they only apply to slicers, as the name implies, right? So if you do anything with a visual, just to give you an idea, if I change anything on this slicer, it clears it. Perfect. But if I select something here and I try to clear it, it's gonna do nothing because this is not a slicer. Slicer is just this one and plus the new slicer. Like list slicers, the button slicers, and so forth. But slicer is the name of the game. So just take that into account whenever you're creating them.
And
Yeah.
there are about 20 questions. I don't know you want to go now through them. You had anything more on visuals?
No, that's it for me.
I think indeed the webinar that we have to give some time to the questions because
Yeah,
there are so
absolutely.
many. So, Ale, shoot.
Oh, Alexander just mentioned, yeah, feedback form. Before we go into the question, guys, do not forget to fill in the feedback form. Tell us if you love us or you hate us. We will take both of them. But of course, if you hate us, you'll get an email from us later on. But that's a different thing. But the cool thing about the feedback form is that we're also allowing you to win an ebook from Pack. So by submitting your feedback, you're not only allowing us to get some valuable insights, you also might get something out of it.
You get a book and you get a 5% winning of chances that give you for free too.
Absolutely. Every single feedback form gives you extra 5%.
Extra 5%. 5 point.
But yeah, we would just appreciate it because it just allows us to understand whether you're not liking these sessions, if something needs to change, if the sort of approach we take here needs to change. Like, tell us everything. All right, time for
Okay.
questions.
I go with this one.
Okay.
Avilash, Jose, it doesn't matter how small or big the data set is. Okay, if you're a senior developer, okay, you can play along. That is no problem for me. But if you are learning, I would prefer you to create a data model so you practice. You get into the finger tricking, do this, that, and the other. And now, when you're at work and you open your data set, you know what you have to do without thinking. Okay, so creating a data set maybe when it's not 100% necessary is, in my view, an excellent exercise that will actually benefit you when you are working later on analyzing data. So, yes, please do. Next question.
What's the difference between planned ETA and trip end date columns as both have different timestamps? So planned ETA, the expected time of arrival at the destination as per trip plan, whereas the other one is trip end date. Trip end date is estimated date time of arrival. The estimated time. I guess they're both sort of estimation, but the way I would probably assume this is what's estimated from the driver, maybe. This is what's estimated based on the booking plan or the trip plan itself. That's why you also have, I think there's a third column actually, which is the actual
Actually,
ETA.
yeah.
Yeah, there we go. The actual time you arrive there.
Yeah, thinking about it, I call, I made the booking, but my driver doesn't come tomorrow until 10 minutes later because he goes on traffic. Therefore, I cannot start my plan,
Yeah,
okay, at that time, and therefore this produce a 10-minute delay in all my ETAs or whatever it is,
yeah.
okay?
There you go. There's actually another thing that you can analyze, right? What's the difference between the planned ETA and the
And
actual
the really,
ETA? So
to see how
that's
many,
interesting.
how many times we arrive late at work.
Yeah. Or how many times do we actually arrive on planned time?
Yeah,
So different, like we said, guys, there's a lot of things you can look into. There are
okay,
hundreds of
Eleazar.
records that match the origin with the destination. Should these records be considered? It depends on how you look at it, right? In a purely realistic world, I can have a planned origin and destination that's exactly the same because it's maybe a round trip. So the driver is supposed to go in one location, pick something up, and get back to me.
Yeah, it can
Think
be
about it like
within
this, right? It's a
the same
two-step
city.
process. Yeah.
Yeah. Within Quito, you can go from A in Quito to B in Quito, and that is within, okay, this destination. Yes, so it can happen.
Yeah, yeah. So think about it like this, right? So basically, I have two trips planned, one after another. I have one driver drive, pick up the cargo, come back to this location. At this time, the next driver is gonna pick it up and take it to somewhere else.
To another location. Correct.
So if you, of course, want to exclude them, you cannot go ahead and do that. We're not gonna say that no, it's completely wrong approach. No, it's fine. Why origin destination location is same in row two? Same thing that we just said. It might be a situation where it's basically a round trip. I'm picking up a cargo from a sub location and coming back. What is the difference between plan ETA and trip and date columns? I think we already had this. Maybe it's a duplicate. Yeah. When you're checking the date diff, did you notice that some of the rows, the shipping date started before the booking date? I'll be honest, I didn't. But now that you mention it, let's quickly take a look at it. So let's go ahead and go with booking ID, and I'm gonna go with date diff and just look at the two ends of it. Yeah, we have few of them. So I would probably filter them out because you can't really have a trip that's planned for something that's in happening prior to it.
Correct. And Neola, remember this information is input in a system by a human, and we make mistake.
Yeah.
Okay, so that happen very often. And what is good about the question is that you actually went through the data set and realized, hey, there are problems in here. What do I do with them?
hmm
Okay, so that is 10 point for you, Aniola.
Because think about it like this, right? If I'm the owner, the business owner, I might want to see and understand, okay, what's the current status of the data entry, right? And these sort of trips that have something happening in the past, which is not realistic, should be flagged. Okay, the system prior to that just didn't flag it for whatever reason. We didn't have a check for it. But now in the report, you just create a flag for it. So give it a value of one, for example, and then give a card saying, hey, we have this many entries where the dates are just something is wrong here.
Mhm.
It's an opportunity.
That's for you, Amy.
First, I'm hearing about the node reach. How does it work? So essentially, the way that the node reach works is for every location, you define a radius around it. So right here in the formatting not the formatting options, but the fields list, you have node reach radius, where you add a value. That value then afterwards needs to be activated. In order to activate it, you need to go into the formatting options, enable one of the shape layers. Type needs to be set as node reach, and then you can say whether the radius is in miles or in kilometers. That's one part of it. The other part is that the node reach can only happen on single item. What I mean by a single item is it cannot be a cluster. Because if you would do this on a cluster, there might be conflict of interest, right? So there might be multiple values. So how do you showcase this? So for example, what I did is just to make sure that it's still possible, I played around with this max clustering zoom level. So after the user surpasses level 5, you can see it right here happening, right? It's not visible. Even if I, for example, what we had here, make it even bigger, like 1,000 kilometer radius. You can see it's now visible from this view. But level 5, level 5, I don't see it. But if I go further, of course, it makes no sense now because the radius is just too big, right? But you can easily see how it's working and when it's getting triggered. So you can play around with these values and define what's going to happen to the end user. When he sees this, what happens to them? Just make sure that these are split. Alternative is, of course, for example, for you to just disable clustering ev- always. But I don't think it's a good approach for any map visual on the very beginning because it just allows you to have also a lot of hot mess. A lot of nodes are overlapping, a lot of information in the same location. You don't really understand how much is in here, right? Because there's a lot of different points. Whereas clustering just allows you to understand, okay, this is the main point of impact. Like there's a lot of interest here. You can see also there's some artifacts from time to time where something gets cached. That's why we have a reset button. So, but the closer I get, the more split information I'm getting from this. Federico, that's for you.
Oh, what I said is I didn't know if Puruna was a city, was a state, was a region. So I just went to Google and enter the information to know are we
Oh
talking
yeah,
about a location, an address? Sorry, an address. I'm talking a city or I'm talking an state. There are plenty. Just Google it and you will find the information there.
yeah.
Okay.
Just to kind of understand the split itself. Yeah. The next page, or it should tell a different story, far different from what the first page is saying. Like Abby's first page is about book. It depends on how you want to build your report. I've had reports where all the pages are somewhat connected. I've had reports where every single page is talking about a completely different view of the data. It depends on how you want to build it. I don't think there's really one approach that must be
There is
taken.
not.
It really depends.
If you follow through, it's because you have something in that first page that needs to be followed through. Clients. I have 27 clients. I want to know more about the client, so you take it to the next page. Okay, and then you have client what product they buy. This product, I want to see more about the product. You take it to the next slide. Okay, but as Avi said, there is no a rule. Is what the clients want to see. I think Avi will agree with me. They don't know what they want, so they will drive you crazy. Okay, and you will try to do the best you can. Okay, and at the end of 3 long months, you might have actually something that the client is happy about it, and you can deliver and get paid for.
Absolutely. Usually, the way I think about it, right, is for example, we had customers who try to just put everything in a single report, and that's what you're going to see a lot happening in real life. So, your job as a developer is to understand how much data you have within the report that you're building. If it's not too much, you can just say, fine, we can have it. But if those are massive data sets, just tell them straight away that you're going to be waiting basically 3 minutes for this to even compute anything. So what I would recommend is we split this is one single report, this in another one, this in a third one. It's you who defines how these things should be done.
Yeah,
It's them who decide how you're gonna do it at the end, but it's your
between
job
brackets.
to
Yeah,
recommend it.
between brackets. Yeah, that happened very little, but yeah, something that you should encounter. For trip duration, should I go for total trip? Avilash, that is your angle.
Yeah.
Okay, that is your angle. Take a decision. Pick one of them and go for it. What will you use, Avi?
How can we use the GPS provider column? It's just a categorical column where you can see, for example, which GPS trackers are most used most commonly. I would basically go with it like that. If it's not
Yep.
something you need, just delete it.
Or you can say, okay, let's see what company, because we have the customer, the client, we have a couple of things. Okay, but the GPS most used
Yeah,
is Bailey Logistics. Okay, I can tell you that there are 29 different GPSs providers, I think,
yeah,
if I'm
yeah,
not wrong.
exactly.
So you can actually make a little analysis of what company use that GPS more than others.
Yeah. Or, for example, based on the GPS company, who are his biggest customers? Like
Yeah.
vice versa. You decide how to do these things.
Something that I do, guys, and I would like you to know is sometimes I throw my data set, not the real one, not world one. I mean, this one into ChatGPT, and I tell ChatGPT, please analyze and give me an angle.
Yeah,
Okay. And he will come back to you with an idea. You can refine that until you're happy. Okay, I'm going to take the angle. Okay. Believe me, if I got if I get this data set at work, I will struggle with it. Okay, I will need to go to my mate who had done logistics, okay, and inquiry, what do you think, see what the client want, and trying to work it out because it's something that I don't do every day, okay, and that has so many columns. Some of them are very similar in name, okay. So remember, is we know this data set is good because of that. The little complication it's bringing with. Okay, now your job is not only to design a proper report, is to look for an angle, clean it, and come back to us with, guys, I did it.
yeah.
How can I label display? There is a question there. How are we about time, Alex? There is a question here, Avis. How
Yep.
can I add labels to display the growth rate on a chart in Zoom chart similar? There you go, the question. Yeah.
I would need to see exactly what you are trying to recreate there, but to have a proper answer. But I would say in most cases, what I do with growth rates, if I just want to have a label for it, I typically use it as a separate series and configure it just purely for the labels. I think we did it actually in the previous challenge webinar where I showcased how it was month over month or year over year. One of them was that. So yeah, you can maybe take a look at the previous one. I think we covered it, if I'm not entirely wrong. If not, then Aniola, just message us at webinars@zoomcharts.com. Send us the sample that you're trying to recreate, and then I have a better understanding of what you're trying to do and get back to you.
And please, guys, fill up the form. It give us indication of what to talk, or you want to do something different with my little presentation or Avi's presentation in the next challenges. It's important for us to you to tell us what to do. Okay? And I think we are done, no, Avi, for today?
Yeah, I think we're good today. So thank you so much, guys, for coming. I hope you learned something new and most importantly, useful. Right? That's the most important aspect. And definitely looking forward to the top five announcement and looking forward to seeing your submissions.
Thank you, guys. And I see
Thank you.
you very soon. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.